this is Sara with Posh Pooch Designs, and this week's question that I'm going to answer is, what is my favorite way to join granny squares? There are lots of different ways to join them, and in this video today I'm going to show you 3 different ways. I'm going to show you how to put them together and sew them together with a needle and thread. I'm going to show you how to single crochet the edges together, and then I'm going to show you in the third technique what I call granny square join. It's a different technique that I sort of stumbled upon. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways. All of these are worsted weight yarns. They're granny squares that I have whipped up for other projects, and so I thought I would just use these to go ahead and show you these 3 techniques. First technique that I'm going to show you is how to sew your granny squares together with a needle and thread, or a needle and yarn actually, unless you made it out of thread, of course. Here I have 2 granny squares. Now I haven't blocked them yet. It's always a good idea to block your granny squares when you get them done. But I'm going to sew these together just so that you have an idea of how to do this particular technique. So what you're going to do, these are the 2 fronts. So I'm going to put the fronts together like this, and here's the side that we're going to be working on, and you can see on the side that there's a front loop and back loop on each side of the granny square. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start in the corner, and we're only going to go through the front loop on one side and the back loop on the other, and these are the outside loops of your granny square. And I like to use this technique when I have a solid granny square that I'm working on. I just think it lays really nice. And so what you'll do is you'll stitch with your needle and your yarn across the side of the granny square, only going through the outside loops on each side of the granny square. And we do that so that it lays pretty on the front. One thing to remember is you want your stitches to stay put, but don't pull them too tightly because you don't want your granny square to pucker. So we're stitching on the outside loops of our granny square. And you'll do that all the way across and tie off on both ends. If you're joining more, I like to do like them in rows and then turn them and do a whole row, and it lays really pretty. So let me show you the front. Here's where we stitched it, and I used this beige yarn so that you could see it. But if you use a matching yarn, it's almost next to impossible to see it once you tie off. And you can see the front loops now will lay together nicely for this technique. And that's the first technique, stitching your squares together with a needle and yarn. For the second technique, I'm going to show you how to single crochet your squares together. And it's similar to sewing them together, only we're going to use our crochet hook. These were stitched with an eye hook, so I'm just using an eye hook. And it's a good idea to use the same size hook that you stitch so that it can, fit nicely, and you won't have bigger or smaller stitches because you used a different crochet hook. Now, what we're going to do is it's this similar thing. You're going to put your fronts together like we did with sewing them together with a needle and thread. And then we're going to go in the outside loops again of our row, outsides, and we're going to join our yarn in. And I'm using this brown so you can see. Put your yarn in. And then basically you're going to be stitching the same way we sewed. Let me get that yarn out of the way. And you'll be stitching going through the outside loops and make a single crochet. Now you could also make a slip stitch if you wanted to. I just like the way the single crochet lays. The slip stitch is a little puckery to me, but it really depends on the project that you're working on. So we're going through the outside stitches or loops of each stitch and single crocheting. Outside loop, and you'll do that all the way across. And again, if I'm doing a big project, I'll do a bunch of them together, and then I'll do a bunch in a row. So let's turn it over so you can see what it looks like. So I did it, of course, in the beige so that you can see, and it makes a nice, let me get that yarn out of the way there. It makes a nice even row right here if you want them to be tidied up close. And that works just fine for any baby blanket or blanket that you want. And I use this technique a lot. I use the needle and thread technique a lot of times if it's a smaller project, and I'll use this for a bigger project. I don't know why, I just prefer it that way. But those are two techniques. And then the last one I'm going to show you is a really fun technique. All right, so we talked about how to put our granny squares together with a needle and thread, and then we talked about how to do the edges stitching closely with single crochet. This last technique I'm going to show you is quite different, and I call it the granny square join because you are going to continue to be stitching in a granny square style. So what you're going to do is, the other two we put our tops up and we closed them on each other. But what you're going to do in this technique is your tops are going to be up and you're going to put them, the backs, against each other. And I always set them like this, and I have them at a little bit of a stagger, I guess that's what you'd call. Because we're going to be going back and forth in those granny square holes. Now this technique will only work if you have granny square holes. Because if you don't have a hole to go into, it won't work. Now you could count it off and do this, like on the solid, you could count it off and do it in every third or fourth or whatever. But this technique works best if you have the traditional granny square. So what we're going to do, now remember, your front side is on the outsides and the inside, the back, is on the inside on this technique, and we have our squares graduated or whatever you want to call that. Okay. So we're going to start in this corner. We're going to join and chain 3. 1, 2, get in there, 3. Then we're going to place 2 double crochets in that same corner. 1, 2. So now we have 3 double crochets because our chain 3 counted as our first double crochet. And now we're going to move over to the chain 2 space or chain 3 space, however you're doing your granny square, to your corner space and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to move over here to our first chain 2 space and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. And now we'll be going to the next chain 2 space on the other side. 1, 2, 3. And you'll continue to go back and forth, stitching 3 double crochets in each of the chain 2 or chain 3, depending on how you did your granny square. I usually do chain 2. Some people do chain 1, so it could be a chain 1 space. Because believe it or not, there are lots of ways to do granny squares. Even the traditional granny squares. All right, now can you see how the pattern's going? We're going across each of those spaces and stitching 3 double crochets. I'm going to go all the way across because I want to show you this fun technique. 1, 2, 3. I know I'm going fast. Now we're going to do the last chain 2 space on that side. 1, 2, 3. Then we'll do the last chain 3 space in that corner. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll do the last chain 3 double crochets in this last chain 2 space. 1, oopsie doopsie, there we go, 2 and 3. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and cut that so you can see how that looks laid out flat. We'll tie that off. And this is the way it looks. Now, you'll notice it's a little wonky here and here. But what you'll do when you're putting it together, you'll stretch it this way a little bit. And then if you put a bunch of these together across, then you'll lay them in a row, and you'll do the same thing when you're stitching them together this way. And then you'll place one of the chain 3 double crochets in this space when you're going across this way. So I think this is loads of fun. I have to tell you, I think it's a great technique. I use it a lot when I'm making like I want it to have a little bit of a lacy look. And the thing is, if you're doing it in the same color as your blocks, it just blends in and you can hardly even tell. And don't worry about it looking wonky, because when you put them together, you just stretch it over a little bit and go straight across. And that's why I call it the granny square join.